People say they feel poor. They say worry about money is at a high level not seen in many years. They say everything feels more costly, more unsure, and harder to handle than before. And yet restaurants are crowded, airports are busy. Holiday shopping times keep breaking new spending records. On the outside, none of this seems to fit together. For many years, the link between money pressure and how people spend was easy to expect. When people felt tight, they held back. They put off buying things, cut extra spending, and focused on basic needs over comfort. But that pattern has quietly changed. Today, many families feel worse about their money situation than in recent years, and still keep spending anyway. Not without care, not always without thinking, but steadily, and often in ways that do not show clear warning signs until much later. This video is not about blaming people for their choices. And it is not about saying the economy is strong just because spending has not fallen apart. It is about explaining why spending has become a confusing sign, and why what looks like strength on the outside may actually be something very different underneath. Because when you look at the full picture, this is not really a story about trust in the future. It is a story about pressure. It is a story about spending for emotional reasons becoming common. And it is a story about how easy use of debt has quietly changed the way people deal with worry. If spending used to show financial health, today it often shows something else completely. And understanding that difference is important, not just for the economy, but for what happens next. One of the most confusing parts of today's economy is that what people say and what people do are going in different directions. On one side, surveys always show high worry. Families report feeling tight. They say they are worried about prices, worried about keeping jobs, and unsure if their money situation will get better soon. On the other side, spending actions tell a completely different story. People are still booking trips. They are still filling shopping carts. They are still showing up in sales numbers as active buyers. This difference has a name in economics. It describes the growing space between how people describe their money reality and how they act inside it. Before the pandemic, this space existed, but it was quite small. When trust fell, spending usually followed. When hope returned, buyers opened up again. Since the pandemic, that link has become weaker, and in some cases completely gone. Part of the reason is that the world people are dealing with feels completely different. Worry is no longer short-term. It is no longer tied to one event or period. It feels constant, many-layered, and hard to predict. When worry becomes lasting, actions change. Instead of treating spending as something to wait on until things get better, many people now treat it as something to keep while they still can. Not because they feel safe, but because waiting no longer feels helpful. In that setting, surveys lose some of their ability to predict. People can truly report feeling negative and still act in ways that look positive on paper. And that is where wrong understandings begin. Because when leaders, experts, or news point to steady spending as proof that buyers are holding strong, they are often missing the mental change underneath. Spending is no longer a clear sign of strength. It is increasingly a sign of change in behavior. People are not spending because they think everything will be fine. They are spending because life keeps going forward no matter how they feel about the future. And that difference changes how we should read the numbers and what we should worry about next. Every time worries about the economy come up again, one number is almost always used as a counterpoint. Holiday spending. Sales go up, stores report strong seasons. News frame it as proof that buyers are strong and the economy is holding together. But this is where background matters because higher spending does not always mean people are buying more things. And in today's setting, that difference is very important. Over the past few years, what people spend on has changed. Prices are higher everywhere, which means families can spend more money while getting the same or even fewer items. A shopping cart that costs more does not always hold more value. It often just shows a higher price on basic and everyday goods. This is why main sales numbers can be confusing. They measure dollars, not buying power. They show total spend, not money comfort. There has also been a basic change in how people pay. Online shopping has made it easier. One-click buying, saved payment details, and payment plans have made spending feel easier in the moment. The mental stop that once made buyers pause and think again is weaker than before. As a result, holiday spending has become less about extra fun and more about emotional needs. Families do not see these buys as choices. They see them as duties to keep traditions, keep a sense of normal life, or protect moments of happiness in an otherwise worried year. That is why holiday sales can rise even when trust falls. That is why stores can look busy even when families feel tight. What looks like buyer strength is often just buyers changing their choices. They are cutting back quietly in some areas. Savings, long-term plans, future choices while keeping visible spending the same. And that is the risk of using holiday spending as a check on the economy. It tells us that money is still moving, but not why it is moving or what it is replacing underneath. Because when spending is kept going by pressure rather than trust, the sign it sends is far less comforting than it looks. To understand why spending has stayed so strong under pressure, you have to go beyond economics and into feelings. Because for a growing number of families, spending is no longer just a money choice. It is a feeling one. Spending for emotional reasons is not about lack of care or bad control. It is about how people react when stress becomes long-term rather than short-term. When worry goes on month after month, the mind looks for relief. Not best long-term choices, but short-term calm. Buys give that relief. They create a sense of control in a world where many people feel less in control. They offer small moments of normal life when the bigger picture feels weak. This is especially true for families. Parents do not see spending choices alone. They see them through duty. Cutting back on themselves is one thing. Cutting back on their children on birthdays, holidays, shared moments feels like something else completely. So choices happen quietly. Trips get put off, savings get lowered, long-term plans move further back. But visible spending stays the same because it protects something people value deeply. The feeling that life has not become too small. That is why spending for emotional reasons has become so common. It is not driven by hope. It is driven by a wish to protect importance in the present when the future feels harder to believe in. The problem is that emotional relief does not remove money results. It puts them off. Money spent to feel better today does not go away. It shows up later as tighter money plans, higher amounts owed, and less choices. And because those costs are not clear and come later, they are easier to ignore now. Over time, this creates a weak balance. Spending holds up not because families are doing great, but because cutting back feels more painful than the risk of moving results to the future. And that is when spending stops being a show of trust and starts becoming a way to deal with stress, one that looks lasting on the outside, but carries growing costs underneath. Spending for emotional reasons explains the reason. Debt explains the way. Because without easy use of credit, much of today's spending simply would not happen. Over time, debt has changed from a backup choice to a main part of everyday buying. Credit cards, payment plans, and delayed payment programs have made the line between having money and having access to money unclear. For many families, that difference now hardly exists. What makes this different from past times is how common it has become. Debt is no longer kept for emergencies or big buys. It is increasingly used to make everyday life smoother. Groceries, utilities, travel, and seasonal costs that used to be paid in cash. This changes how people feel spending. When the right now cost is small, delayed, or split across many payments, choices feel easier. The money impact becomes not clear something to handle later, and later is exactly where the risk builds up. As amounts owed rise, choices shrink. As lease payments grow, extra room disappears. And as duties add up, families become more open to even small problems. This is how a buyer debt problem builds. Not through a quick fall, but through quiet becoming normal. Each single choice feels okay. Together, they create a setup that needs steady conditions to work. The risk is that steady conditions are exactly what many families do not have. Spending supported by debt can make the economy look healthier than it is. It keeps money moving. It supports sales numbers. It puts off clear stress. But it also moves weakness from now into the future where it becomes harder to handle and easier to ignore until things change. And when things do change through job loss, fewer hours, or higher costs, the same debt that helped spending becomes a limit. At that point, families do not just have to change their way of life. They have to undo it. That is why debt is so important in this talk. It is not just making spending possible. It is changing how people deal with worry and how open they are when that worry finally becomes real. One of the most common points of confusion in today's economy is price increases. News focus on rates going down. Reports talk about price increases cooling. And on paper, that sounds like help. But for many families, it does not feel that way at all. That is because price increases slowing does not mean prices are dropping. It simply means they are going up more slowly than before. The harm has already been done and it is fixed at a higher level. Everyday costs moved upward: food, insurance, housing, services, and very few of them ever went back down. For families whose pay did not rise at the same speed, this created a lasting space between what things cost and what feels possible to pay. This is where spending actions become easier to misread. People are not reacting to price increase charts. They are reacting to price levels. They remember what things used to cost, and they feel the difference. Every time they pay a bill, even if pay has gone up, those increases often feel used up before they ever turn into extra room. So when people keep spending, it is not because price increases feel fixed. It is because cutting back does not bring back the past. It just makes the present smaller. That is why price increases have such a strong feeling effect long after the highest point has passed. It lowers trust. It changes hopes, and it strengthens the idea that waiting does not always make things easier. In that setting, spending becomes less about waiting for the right time in the economy and more about handling reality as it is right now. And that prepares the way for the next pressure point. That ties everything together and decides how long this action can last. On the outside, the job market still looks steady. Job loss has not jumped. Jobs are still being made. And there's no single news shouting problem. But underneath that outside, the setup of the job market has changed in ways that people feel long before they show up clearly in the numbers. Much of the recent job growth has been in a small set of areas: healthcare, social help, and other areas tied to needed services. Meanwhile, many higher-paying and more free roles in making things, moving goods, and office work have slowed or quietly gone away. For workers in those areas, the change is small but important. Hours become less sure, pay raises get put off, job searches take longer than hoped. Another key sign is the rise in people working part-time, not because they want to, but because they cannot find full-time work. That kind of not full work does not always show as a problem, but it steadily lowers money safety. Pay becomes harder to plan around, and even small costs start to feel riskier. This is where spending for emotional reasons and debt openness meet with job reality. When people are not sure their pay will grow or even stay the same, long-term planning loses importance. Saving feels not needed, choices feel weak, and decisions move toward keeping steady today rather than getting ready for worry tomorrow. The job market does not have to fall apart to create this action. It just has to stop getting better. And when forward movement stops, families change. They do not always worry a lot. They change quietly by using more credit, stretching money plans further, and holding on to the parts of life that feel important while they still can. That is why job market stress often shows up in spending actions before it shows up in job losses. People feel the change early, even if the numbers take time to catch up. When spending keeps going under pressure, the cost does not go away. It moves. And the choices tend to show up in places that do not create quick pain, which is why they are so easy to miss. Savings slow down. Safety funds get thinner. Long-term goals quietly move further away. For many families, the choice is not between spending and saving. It is between keeping normal life today and giving up extra safety tomorrow. And because tomorrow feels not clear and today feels needing, the future often loses. This is where the risk builds up. When money safety gets smaller, families become more open to small problems. A car fix, a health bill, or a few weeks of lower pay suddenly carry far more weight than before. The room for mistakes goes away long before spending clearly falls. Home owning is one of the clearest examples. Rising costs and higher interest have already pushed owning out of reach for many. Continued use of debt and lower savings only make that space wider. What starts as short-term dealing slowly turns into long-term being left out. Retirement follows a similar pattern. Skipping payments does not feel needed when the result is many years away. But over time, those skipped years add up into fewer choices and more need later on. None of this happens quickly. That is what makes it risky. Spending stays steady. Life appears working and the system looks steady until it is not. And when things do get tighter, families with less choices feel the impact first and hardest. The real risk is not that people are spending. It is that they are spending while slowly losing their ability to handle problems. And that is a weakness no amount of short-term strength can hide forever. It is easy to see everything happening right now as an only American problem. Rising costs, tight families, spending that seems not connected to reality. But when you look at the full picture, the same patterns appear again and again across other rich countries. Countries like Australia and Canada are facing similar pressures. Cost of living has risen faster than pay. Housing being possible to buy has gotten much worse. Younger people report lower happiness with life and more negative views even as main economic signs stay quite steady. In those countries, just like in the United States, spending has not fallen apart. People are still traveling, still shopping, still taking part in the economy. But the reasons underneath are very similar. Asset prices jumped during the pandemic years. Debt became easier to get. And everyday costs moved higher without a matching move in money safety. As a result, families changed in the same way by focusing on the present and moving worry forward. This is important because it changes the whole talk. What we are seeing is not careless actions limited to one culture or one set of rules. It is a wider reaction to a world change in how people feel economic safety. When systems feel less sure, people focus on what feels real right now and feeling grounding. Spending becomes less about hope and more about keeping lifestyle identity and a sense of moving forward in a world that feels harder to plan for. That is why this pattern is so lasting, and that is why it is unlikely to fix quickly because it is not driven by one rule, one vote, or one economic period. It is driven by a deeper loss of belief in the idea that waiting will be rewarded. And once that belief becomes weaker, behavior changes everywhere at once. So when you see crowded restaurants, busy flights, and strong spending news, it is worth stopping before making decisions because spending no longer tells a clear story about trust. It often tells a story about change in behavior. Spending for emotional reasons has become a way to deal with long worry. Easy use of credit has made that dealing possible, at least for now. And price increases have quietly moved the cost of everyday life in ways that have not been fully taken in. Together, those forces can keep the economy moving while families grow weaker underneath. That does not mean people are not careful. It means the rules they are reacting to have changed. The risk ahead is not that spending suddenly falls. It is that choices do. And when choices disappear, even small problems can have big results. So the real question is not whether people are still spending, it is what they are giving up to keep doing it. Because the longer this pattern goes on, the more costly that choice becomes, not just for people, but for the economy as a whole.